Well, good morning everyone, and how are you doing today? And welcome to the Car Stereo Lab. Fernando!
Yes!
You ready?
I'm ready.
To do what?
I have no idea.
Exactly. Right. Today we're gonna do something that's been, well, it's kind of been bugging me for a while, and we've been talking about it. See, the problem is, we put a DSP in Fernando's car, we have the opportunity to play with it, we've been putting radios in my car, and I've played with them, and, well, to be honest with you, it's just not enough. This question gets asked us all the time. It's like, if I already have a radio with all these EQs and stuff in it, do I still need? Yes, you do. And after playing with your car,
yep.
Well, pretty much every customer that comes through here, I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like, I need a DSP because I need to be able to play with it. I want to do things that I can only do with a DSP. Now here's where the problem lies. I'm not ready to put a stereo in it yet. I mean, I don't know what speakers I want. I don't have amplifiers to go in it. So what to do? We have a solution. Now, this is one of those, why didn't I think of that sooner solutions? Let me show you. This guy right here, the PXE-0850S. Now I know what you're thinking. Wait, what? Why? This is a DSP. You're right, it is a DSP, but it's a special DSP. This guy has a built-in 25 watts times 8 at 4 ohm amplifier built into it. I know, right? That's perfect, because in my car, I have the factory subs, the rear speakers, the front doors, and a center channel. So this will be able to power all that. And the other cool thing, it's roughly the size of the factory amplifier, so this will be able to go in the same place. We're gonna make a bracket that's gonna go in the same way, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that more. Now, the nice thing about this is that I don't need to run all the power wires and accessory. I don't have to do any of that. I can use a T-harness for this. Pack makes this guy right here, which is for the new Amp Pros. So this is the AMP-GM02, and inside of it is 3 harnesses and some instructions, but we don't need those for what we're doing. Now, there again, this isn't made for my car, but all these are the same plugs that are in my car, meaning they match these. So I have my main speaker one that is right here. I have this one, which is my main signal, and I have this one here, which is my main power. So the idea is that I'll be able to make that bracket, take these harnesses and this DSP, hook it all together, plug it into my car, and not have to worry about doing all the other stuff. And then I'll have my DSP. Now, for those of you guys unfamiliar with the PXE, there's an app for that. It's this guy right here. And what this allows me to do, it's actually got 10 channels of adjustment, even though there's only 8 powered, which is fine because we don't need more than 8. But I can go into here, I can go in and I can select what I want each channel to do. And then I have the cool crossover. I can select individual bands here. And then if I scroll over, there's 31 bands of adjustment for each channel. I know, right? The way I look at this is a win-win all the way around. I get to play with the cool new Alpine product, and I get a DSP in my car. Sound like a good idea?
It's amazing.
I know, right? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and get the car pulled in. I've actually already pulled out the aftermarket radio that was in there, and we put the factory one back in. Not that it mattered, we could still leave that in there, but I wanted to do this test wholeheartedly, meaning I wanted the factory radio in there to play with. Yeah, why not? And I was getting kind of bored with the aftermarket one, to be honest with you, so that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. Let's get the car inside and let's figure out how we're gonna do this. Now, just like I said, the factory radio is back in, and let's go ahead and get into the trunk of this guy. Now, for those of you that have this car, if you're unaware, this one has the Boston Acoustic Premium sound system in it. The amplifier is located here in the driver's side rear portion behind these taillights. So this is the factory amplifier here. There's one little 10mm bolt that holds the whole thing in place, located right here. Go ahead and pull that out, and then this will come right out. And there's plenty of wire here to move it pretty much into the center of the trunk if you want. Before we go ahead and get rocking and rolling on this, there's one thing we need to do. Since they're the factory speakers and this amplifier actively crosses everything over and does the surround and all that funky stuff, what we want to do is we want to take an RTA, play some pink noise, and kind of get an idea of where they have the factory crossover points on these speakers. That way we at least have some form of a reference so we know where to start when setting up our system. We're not going to leave them that way, but at least, you know, it'll get me home tonight. So we're in the car now, and what we want to do is we want to kind of get an idea of what sound is coming out of the speakers. So we have our center, we have the doors here that we're going to concentrate on. For that, we're going to be using the DM RTA that we're beta testing. It's an RTA, it's an audio RTA that we're going to be using in the car. And the reason why it says audio RTA is because we're using the microphone. We're not going to be metering electrically here. We're going to show you both ways of doing it. So when we're done with this, we'll write our numbers down, and we'll go back to the amplifier and measure the electrical output and see where those frequencies are at. But let's concentrate on one at a time so it doesn't get confusing. We're going to play pink noise, and we're going to put our microphone next to the speaker, and that's going to show us a curve on here, or a bump. We'll call it a bump. Now what we're looking for is the high point in that bump. Once we kind of get an idea of where it's at, then we can switch over to the sine wave, and we can play that and see where the highest peak is in that sine wave. That should be about where our crossover point is going to be. The one thing to consider is that every speaker has its own characteristics that can influence that. That's why we're going to go ahead and do the electrical as well. This should get you close. So if you only have access to, you know, let's say a phone that's running an RTA app, at least you'll be able to get extremely close if you're doing a situation like this. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Now, as you can see, there's a really high point here at 400. Now we're gonna go ahead and we'll switch over to the sine wave. Go ahead and put it at 400, and we'll see what it sounds like now. So there's that peak that we were seeing. Go ahead and drag this down, and it disappears with no intensity. Let's go up a little bit. So it looks like somewhere around between, let's say, 420 and 440 is where it's most intense, and then it just rolls off. Now, we're not worried about the front half of this, we're just worried about the bass blocking. We want to get that right. The other side could just be the characteristics of the speaker, meaning it just has a natural roll off where there's not that much intensity. Could be there's some form of a bandpass crossover, meaning a high and a low pass, limiting its frequency range. But we can figure that out once we're actually listening to it. If there's too much treble coming from there, then we can kind of get an idea that there was. Now we'll go back to the pink noise. As you just saw on this side, there was a slope that went all the way down. That could just be characteristics of the speaker. Now we'll go ahead and try and see what the door speaker's doing. So that looks like it has a high point of about 140. So we'll go ahead and we'll go to the sine wave and we'll put in 140. All right, let's move it down some. As you can see, it loses all that intensity. So as we're turning it up, there's definitely a crossover point right in that area. So now I have an idea of how high we need to cross over the center channel, as well as the mid bass and the door seem to be crossed over about 140. So now at this point, if we were to just go ahead and put in the DSP, we could put in those crossover points and we would have a good starting point to where we're not going to blow those factory speakers. We're going to take this one step further, as I said, and we're going to go test the electrical output. For one, that'll give us what channel's which, and two, it will eliminate the characteristics of the speaker influencing the RTA. So we're not going to be using a microphone for this, we're actually going to be using speaker leads and looking at the electrical signal coming out, not the speaker moving, because that speaker moving can affect what the RTA is seeing. So let's head into the trunk. So the first thing we need to do back here at the amplifier is figure out what speaker wire goes where. And for that, we're going to use this PT9A polarity tester. So we know this middle plug here, which is the big one, is going to be our speaker plug. We'll go ahead and we'll plug in our meter. And what it's going to do is make a popping sound in one of our speakers. Use our handheld polarity checker to make sure we have the right polarity, and then we can write down the color and what position it's in. So in this case, it's making a sound out of our passenger front. We'll come over here. And we're getting red, so that means that whatever we have our probes plugged into is backwards. So now that we know which one's which, we'll go ahead and write that down. That's going to be number 2, and we have light green is positive and dark green is negative. Now we'll go ahead and do this for all of these to make sure we know what's what. One is going to be tan is positive and gray is negative. Our center channel is going to be yellow and light blue. Now never assume anything. Never assume that you've done a GM before, so the lights in the front are positive and the darks in the back are negative. Don't ever assume that. Don't ever assume when you're looking at the plug if it goes positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. That's gonna be that way throughout the whole plug because it doesn't work that way. These manufacturers love to screw things up by design or by accident. Because you gotta remember, these cars are built, so anytime you build anything, there's an opportunity to screw it up. So now we know what the outputs are on the speakers. We're gonna go grab our pack harness and see if they match up at all. All right, so we have this cool T harness, which is the speaker input output, the whole thingy, and it plugs in perfect. None of it lines up, meaning none of these speakers are anywhere where they need to be, which is fine because at least there's something in there. I'm gonna take a minute and see if I can depin these. I haven't had a lot of luck with this style harness, but I'm gonna give it a try. Inside this harness is this cool little white lock that clips into here. If you push these little legs up and remove this, then with a Delphi pin extraction tool, that number right there, you can reach in there, pull these wires out. Now we'll go ahead and take all these wires that we just took out that conveniently have nice little ends on them that tell us what they are, even center, and we'll go rebuild the plug in the car real quick. So all we've done is we've gone ahead and used our notes to put these wires back in the right order. So now that they line up with our harness, we can go ahead and we're gonna repeat the process where we take our tone generator and retone these and make sure we didn't get any of the wires wrong. And we'll go check them with this. All right, so now that we have this harness made, we wanna test the output of the amplifier, which is fine. We can grab the other end of the T harness that we're not using and we can plug that into the amp here. Now if we wanted to, we could also go ahead and repin this just so we had a perfect match for this amplifier. I'm not gonna do that though because I could probably use this in another install. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put this next to it here like this, and that way I can just grab the corresponding colors to the speakers that I want, and I'll hook up my RTA here. We have our test probes plugged into our DM-RTA. We're gonna come over here and we're gonna switch our inputs to speaker input, and we should go ahead and plug these guys into here, and we are metering the passenger front mid bass. It looks very similar to what we saw before on this side here. That's what we're concentrating on. Let's go ahead and we'll switch over to sine wave. All right, so there's 140, 150. Alright, so this is having a high point of 180. So that could be the speaker that's influencing that crossover point. So we'll just write both numbers down so now we have an idea. Let's move over to the center channel and see what that's doing. So this looks a lot different than what it did when we were just playing it out of the speaker. As you can tell over here, the speaker, this dropped off drastically. It looked actually the opposite to this. So that's telling me that there's something about that speaker that has a natural roll off in the high frequency range. It's not some form of a bandpass coming out of the amplifier. All right, so that's the 430 that we had previous. Still pretty high. Let's check a little bit below it. It goes down. Let's check above it. So it looks like 500 is about where this is coming the most peaky at. All right, so now that we've done the microphone output and the electrical output, we have a good idea of what the amplifier is doing as well as what those factory speakers are doing. Now there's a lot of instances where knowing this information could be important. In this case, because we're keeping the factory speakers, we're just gonna amp them. Knowing where they're crossed over at from the factory is gonna be very helpful so we don't blow them. Or if we were gonna add aftermarket speakers, and let's say we wanted to know, do we need the passive crossovers that come with those aftermarket speakers? Well, is it a full range output going to that, or is there some form of an ACT crossover from the amplifier? So in this case, there is some form of an active crossover. So if we were just going to take out, let's say, that center channel and replace it with another 2.5 inch, if it came with a crossover, we wouldn't need it because this has a crossover. Same with the speakers in the door. The mid bass has some form of a crossover on it. The other situation is if we want to know what this amplifier is putting out, because we're going to be adding, let's say, amplifiers on the output side of this, meaning let's say it's not variable voltage, which conveniently enough, this amplifier is a variable voltage output, meaning when you turn up and down the volume, the input to the amplifier goes up and down. It's not fixed, meaning when you turn up and down the volume, it doesn't do anything, which means it'd be some form of a data. This car's old enough to where it's cool. That's one of the reasons why this is gonna work. But now we have a good idea of where those factory crossover points are. There's two more harnesses we have to make work. One is the input harness, and the second is the power and the subwoofer harness. Now the subwoofer harness and the power harness is this big guy here on the end, and they make a nice harness for it. However, it doesn't plug in, and it also won't plug into the amplifier. So that's telling me that they're slightly different, and immediately I can see what it is. On the newer harness, it's just got a rib down the center. On the older harness, it has 2 ribs here and here. I'm not really worried about those ribs. I'm gonna go ahead and modify this so that I can plug this harness into it. And to do that, I just need to grind these 2 down. Now, another good tool to use instead of a grinder is a flush cutter. We'll go ahead and we'll flush cut these. And what a flush cutter is it's a pair of wire cutters. It's flat here on the back side so that you can lay it close to something. This is what you want to use when you're cutting zip ties. Ah, there we go, success. It'll still plug into the amplifier, no problem. So if we ever did want to put it back to factory, it's okay. Now we have to do the same thing that we did with the other harness. We have to figure out what's what. Now this has power and ground as well as 2 sets of subwoofer wires. And conveniently, those might actually be labeled properly. That would be refreshing. Let me go ahead and take some of this tape off this harness, get it down to the raw form, and we'll figure that out. We're gonna go ahead and test these now. And we have our polarity tester again, the PT9A. Let's go ahead and see what they have for power and ground, and we'll try to use that. Now we can test these from the back with our polarity tester because this should be red. The front would be positive movement, which would be green. The back would be red for negative movement. Now we're getting greens, which we don't want. We actually want reds. All right, so that's telling me that these 2 wires are flipped. So we just need to go take this back over to the bench and flip negative and positive on this, and then they'll be the right way. All right, so we got reds because we're on the back side. So now the last harness that we have is the output from the factory radio. That's this little guy here. Now this guy is just all browns. There's a set of grays, but it's just all browns. So I don't think we're gonna have to repin anything on this because there's really nothing to repin. But we do need to figure out what is front, rear, left, right on this. So to do that, we're gonna go back to the RTA. What that's gonna allow us to do is we're gonna play pink noise, and then Fernando's gonna sit in the front, and he's gonna fade it from all 4 corners. And that'll tell us on here what is left, right, front, rear. All right, so we went ahead and prepped our harness. That means we stripped down the little ends, we've removed the other side of it. We're gonna go ahead and plug it in. I'm gonna grab what I think is a set of wires and see if we get tone here on the RTA. All right, so that seems pretty flat output. Turn the volume down, Fernando.
Volume down, it's coming to 40.
All right, you're good. You can turn it back up. So that's showing us we definitely have one of the channels. Now what we want to do is we're going to fade it from front to rear to see if it is a front channel or a rear channel. So let's fade it to the rear. Nope. Okay, fade it to the front.
Fade it to the front.
All right, let's go left, go right.
To the right.
Okay, go back to the left.
Go back to the left.
So what that's telling us is that these 2 wires here are gonna be front left. So that's gonna be a white. So we're gonna go ahead and take some white tape here, and we're just gonna put a little piece on this just to flag those 2 so we know what they are. And we'll move on to the next 2. All right, so now we know all our signal outputs. There's still 2 wires left on this harness. And I wanna check those to see if one of them is possibly remote turn on. So we'll set our multimeter to the line with the dots, which is DC. Come over here. All right, so the first one we're testing is this white wire. Go ahead and turn the car off, okay? Turn the car back on. All right, so the white wire is in fact a remote turn on. We'll test this orange wire here. It's not giving us anything, but the white wire is. So that's telling us that we also have a white that is the remote. So now we'll go ahead and we'll remove all the wires out of this harness that we're not gonna be using. One final test we have to do, and that is out of this harness that we just figured out, we have to figure out which one of these is positive and negative. They're all brown, and these colors, they don't match anything, so we need to figure that out. To do that, we're gonna use this guy right here. This is a little Dork amplifier, and Dork is the brand name, hooked up to this test speaker right here. Now on the input side of it, it has an aux to RCA, and there is a male here and a female here. And in our player, we're playing a polarity pop disc, meaning a disc that just goes pop, pop, pop. We want to come over to this inputs, and it's gonna make that popping sound. So from there, we can take this guy here and go to the speaker and see if we have positive and negative correct. All right, so that's popping green. Let's flip them. and it's popping red. So what that's telling us is that this particular wire right here is gonna be our positive. So we have a little piece of red shrink wrap. We're gonna go ahead and put that on there, and now we'll move on to the next pair. All right, so now we have our harness all set. We know what is front, rear, left, right. We know which one is positive on here. We know which one is remote turn on. So we have everything we need to go ahead and connect up the Alpine. Let's head over to the bench.